So things are really bad for the British economy, and even Russia will fare better. Now, I believe things are pretty bleak when even the IMF believes your economy will be worse than the most sanctioned country on planet Earth, right? So apparently the UK is going to be the worst advanced economy in the world, the black sheep of the G7. They are going to experience a recession. I mean, even Russia is going to enjoy a 0.3% growth this year, while Britain is slated to contract by 0.6%. Now, things in the UK are truly going from bad to worse, and a stagflation hell is coming. We're likely going to see a recession with high inflation as unemployment continues to rise. Is the worst case scenario, and this is a hole that Britain just dug itself into. Now, inflation has fallen to 10.5% from the peak of 11% last year, but it is still double-digit inflation, guys. So if you believe things are bad in the United States or Asia, the UK is having it really bad. Now, what we are seeing is the market betting that the Bank of England will chicken out and stop their rate hikes to save the British economy, right? It's going to be a battle between pride and reality, because if the bank chooses to pivot now and reverses their hikes, the pound will just turn into toilet paper. Now, Britain is suffering from a lot of structural problems that are made worse by the energy crisis, and now they are alone in fighting the inflation monster. They have cut themselves away from the EU and they are pissed off China, so it's not surprising that the UK could very well be the worst economy in 2023. I think we all remember Liz Truss, right? The British PM who lasted a grand total of 49 days. Now, she started the spiral into economic hell with an insane plan to stimulate the economy out of recession. We had tax cuts for the rich, halting corporate tax increases, and getting into debt to fund them wasn't the best idea. And let's also recall that the Bank of England had to step in and save the gilt market by printing a ton of money to bring down bond yields, right? Now, investors, they understand that the UK doesn't have the appetite for recession or financial crisis. Their central bank will step in to save the day at the expense of the taxpayer. And with the Bank of England sending mixed messages. On one hand, it is too early to declare victory, and on the other, hinting that interest rates are near their peak. Now, the Bank of England is trying to play their hand like the Federal Reserve. But the big problem is they are not the Federal Reserve. The US economy is far bigger, and the dollar system gives the Fed much more room to maneuver around. Now, what the Bank of England is trying to do is to buy time for the UK government to solve the structural problems. But I think they're going to be very disappointed because even God might not be able to save London. Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, which is the equivalent of the Treasury, has come up with a very vague plan called the 4 E's. And it's all about building up enterprise, education, employment, and everywhere. This is extremely broad and there are no specifics, and it's something that even a high schooler could have come up with during recess. And even if it's the right plan, it will take years to build Britain back, because what the BOE is doing right now is just going to cause inflation to remain high for longer. And the problem with demand destruction is how you have to raise rates above inflation to meaningfully bring it down. Right now, inflation is above 10%, but the benchmark rate is only 4%, and this won't work. The gap is just too big to bring inflation down fast, right? Even in the US, the Fed funds rate is at 4.75% and inflation is 6.5%, much closer to reality. And what we have is the Bank of England trapped, right? They can't raise rates without collapsing their economy and the property market, so they have chosen to stay in an inflation limbo and hope and pray for a shallow recession. Now, the hope is for production to rise and supply to increase to bring down inflation, right? But we'll quickly see why that is rather impossible. It's quite impossible. Now, there are many problems that plague modern Britain. There are productivity issues and energy crisis and cutting themselves from the rest of the world. Now, the UK, they are isolated from the rest of the world, and it all started with Brexit. And the reasons included immigration and overregulation from the Union. Now, on the surface, this sounded like a good idea to really maintain total sovereignty, but it cut Britain away from the largest economy in the world, which was only next door. And as a whole, the EU is the largest trading bloc, eclipsing even the US and China. They cut themselves away from getting workers from the EU, making their labor shortage even worse. Trade with other EU countries has also stopped because now the UK isn't part of the single market. And you're talking about tons of regulations, paperwork, and custom problems. You can't even drive a delivery truck from UK to Germany or Spain in one fell swoop anymore, right? So what did this do? It made British companies and investors leave the UK, right? If you wanted to access the European markets, you might as well save money and open your distribution center in the EU. So this sucks away business and revenue from the British economy. Now, in fact, this is costing them £100 billion a year and reducing Britain's output by 4%. And obviously, Brexit is just one factor that's now crushing their economy, but it is making their problems even worse. Now, the UK has an insane productivity problem and acute labor shortage that won't be solved anytime soon. And when you throw in 10% inflation, the UK economy is on the brink of a stagflationary crash, it's on the brink of a collapse, a recession when inflation is still sky high. And the disturbing part is how the UK might have more unemployed people than the official figures, right? According to the official unemployment rate, it is at 3.7%. But a think tank believes there are 3 million people missing from the figure because they reported themselves as economically inactive. Basically, these are jobless people who are not looking for employment. And if this is true, then the UK economy is in a world of problems. And the UK is becoming more isolationist, guys. That is the main problem. It is still acting like the British Empire where the world goes to the UK and not the other way around. So we have Britain cut away from easy trade with the EU, we know that already. And now the UK is also pissing off China, the second largest economy in the world and one of Britain's largest trading partners after the United States and EU countries. We have Rishi Sunak announcing that the golden era of UK-China relations is over, right? And according to him, China poses a systemic challenge to British values and interests. But the numbers don't show that China needs the UK, it's the other way around. In 2022, China's foreign trade with the UK fell by 6.7% and its overall trade grew by 5.9%. What we have is the UK cut off from regular trade thanks to Brexit and worsening relations with China because of politics, and the fate of the UK economy is now in the hands of America. So it's really no surprise, guys, that the IMF downgraded the UK economy to the point that even Russia will do better. And now, if you're the Bank of England, you have to do the ultimate balancing act, right? On one hand, you can't let the economy crash because that will destroy the stock market and cause investment to just run away from the UK. And that's why we are hearing all the jawboning about rates reaching a peak, right? But inflation is still a big problem. At 10%, this is a cost of living crisis. Just check out this report, guys. UK supermarket price inflation hits record high, adding £788 to annual bills. That's a 16.7% inflation in groceries, which I would argue is closer to the true inflation rate for the man on the street. And that's why sooner or later, I believe the UK will do the unthinkable and either rejoin the EU or open up trade with China. And either way, it's going to be painful. The UK might have to swallow their pride and rejoin the Union, or say sorry to China and re-establish normal relations. Maybe they have to do both to save their economy, who really knows? They cannot afford to be isolated, especially when a recession is coming. And the problem with this economic crisis is the pressure it puts on the pound sterling. Remember that the Bank of England is stuck between a rock and a hard place. The Bank of England's mandate is to keep inflation at 2%, but to also support economic growth at the same time, right? And we can see this bipolar situation being reflected in the pound. Even after 10 rate hikes for the Bank of England from 0 to 4%, the pound is still down 11% to the dollar on the year. And when you hike rates, it normally strengthens your currency because the market kind of believes you're taking the inflation fight seriously, right? But investors also know from the Liz Truss debacle that the Bank of England could step in to support the bond market and print money if a crisis hits. And that's why we are seeing so much choppiness in the currency. We have UK bonds rising in value, but this isn't exactly strength. Investors, they are piling to British gilts because they believe the BOE is going to stop hikes soon and pivot, right? They are betting on interest rates to fall and to push up bond values. But the BOE has already introduced the moral hazard of saving the market by buying an unlimited amount of bonds to support them in the past. It's not because the British economy is recovering, but the hope that the BOE will bail out London if a collapse happens, right? But there's a big risk that's really building, guys. Staying in this limbo of high inflation and moderate interest rates is putting the pound sterling on a knife's edge. If the UK economy really collapses and the government decides to do a bailout, it could crush the pound even further. And it really doesn't matter if it's debt monetization from the BOE to really push down bond yields or to inject stimulus directly into the economy. It could spike inflation further, and that could crush the pound and cause foreign investors to really pull out of the British economy. Because even if bond values rise by 5%, but you lose 7% on the currency exchange, what's the point of staying? You still lose money. And I think what we are seeing is money flowing to British bonds and stock market, not really because investors believe the worst is over, but because they believe the Bank of England will chicken out and do a bailout. Now, the pound isn't like the dollar. You don't need to buy commodities, and the majority of international debt isn't in pounds, it's in dollars. Investors buy pounds because they are placing a bet. They are speculating that the BOE will flinch and print. Now, the good thing is that if the UK really enters a recession, it probably won't drag down the whole world. I believe the smart money and the LDIs have already deleveraged themselves from the British bonds after the Liz Truss disaster. And the bad news is that the UK is heading into a stagflation crisis. There's going to be a mixture of high inflation and contracting growth in the economy. And normally, the right thing to do is to allow the recession to fully play through. Now, think of it as washing away the sins of the past. You need to keep rates high to crush inflation, and if unemployment has to rise, it has to rise, guys. In fact, the Bank of England has warned that higher unemployment is the price of fighting inflation, so there's probably no escaping this reality. And the big worry is what the BOE will do if unemployment spikes and the economy collapses, right? Will they bite the bullet and let Britain go through the pain and really solve the structural issues for a real recovery? Or will they immediately pivot and lower rates to stop the crash? And this is what the market is betting on. And if I'm a betting man, I'm leaning more towards this. Unless the UK reintegrates with the rest of the world and becomes more productive, there's only doom and gloom left. This cost of living crisis is not gonna end. So let me know what you think in the comments below. Is the British economy truly doomed? Will the Bank of England chicken out and pivot? Let me know in the comments below. Stay safe, be sure to smash the like button and subscribe as we navigate through these crazy times.